At midnight, a biker bar outside Flagstaff fell silent as a black girl in princess pajamas stepped inside, clutching a white doll. She walked straight to Grim Dalton, leader of the Black Howlers, and whispered that her mother was locked in a basement by a man who wore a police badge. Grim didn't ask questions, he acted. Within hours, a broken family was rescued, hidden evidence reached the press, and a corrupt officer fell with his badge. Justice didn't arrive in uniform that night. It arrived on motorcycles. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe some heroes are willing to look guilty to save the innocent, this story is for you. The rain had been falling over the outskirts of Portland, Oregon since early evening. Thin at first, then steady, turning the asphalt black and reflective beneath the orange glow of streetlights. Midnight arrived quietly, without ceremony. Wind pushed damp leaves against closed storefronts. Somewhere in the distance, a freight train howled like a tired animal, passing through a city that no longer listened. At the edge of an industrial strip stood the Iron Den, a low concrete building with no windows facing the road. The sign above the door flickered, one letter permanently broken. Inside, the air was warm, heavy with oil, leather, beer, and old smoke soaked deep into the walls. This was not a place people wandered into by accident. The music was low, an old rock song from the jukebox, its lyrics rough and honest, about roads that never forgave and rules that belonged to no one. Around battered tables in a long scarred bar sat men who had learned to live with their pasts instead of running from them. Then the metal door opened. It didn't slam. It didn't creak dramatically. It opened slowly, as if whoever pushed it feared making noise. A child stepped inside. Her name was Lily Carter. She was 7 years old, small for her age, slim, with narrow shoulders that made her look even younger under the oversized pink princess pajamas she wore. Soft fabric faded from too many washes. The sleeves were slightly too long, covering part of her hands. Her skin was deep brown, smooth except for the faint shadows under her eyes, swollen and red from crying she had already finished doing somewhere else. In her left hand, she held a white doll. Once bright, now grayish from years of being carried everywhere. One eye was loose. The fabric dress was torn at the hem. Lily's fingers gripped it tightly, not like a toy, but like a handle keeping her upright. She did not look around in wonder. She did not freeze in fear. She closed the door behind her carefully. The jukebox stopped mid-song. Conversation died instantly. Glasses paused halfway to mouths. Laughter vanished as if swallowed by the walls. 30 men, tattooed arms, leather vests, scars earned and remembered, turned their attention toward the smallest person in the room. Lily did not cry. She walked. Her steps were quiet but deliberate, moving across the worn wooden floor as if she had already rehearsed this path in her head. Her eyes were fixed on one man seated near the back, away from the noise. Jack Grim Dalton. Grim was 42, though the lines around his eyes and the gray threaded through his beard suggested more years than that. He was tall, over 6 feet, with a broad frame built not in gyms, but through decades of labor and discipline. His hair was dark, cut short, practical. A long scar ran from just below his left ear down toward his jaw, pale against weathered skin. He wore no jewelry, no unnecessary symbols. His leather vest bore the insignia of the Black Howlers, but it was worn and faded, like something that had survived more than it advertised. Grim's posture was relaxed, yet alert, like a man who had learned that calm and readiness were not opposites. His eyes were the first thing people noticed when they spoke to him. Brown, steady, and unflinching. Not cruel, not soft. Simply attentive. Grim watched Lily approach without moving. Around him, reactions rippled. A younger biker near the bar, Evan, barely 23, lean, restless, with fresh ink climbing his neck, noticed something most others missed. As Lily's sleeve slipped back for a moment, he saw the bruises on her wrist. finger-shaped, old enough to be yellowing, new enough to still hurt. Evan looked away, jaw tightening, fists clenching at his sides. He had seen bruises like that before. He hated how familiar they felt. Lily stopped directly in front of Grim. She was so small, standing there, that some of the men shifted uncomfortably, unsure where to look. Grim noticed something else. Lily's breathing. Shallow, controlled. She was holding herself together piece by piece. She lifted her hand slowly and tugged the edge of his leather vest. Grim reacted immediately. Not by pulling away, not by speaking, but by moving. He slid off his chair and knelt down in front of her, bringing himself to her level. The room watched him do it. When Grim knelt, things were serious. Up close, Lily smelled like rain and soap. Cheap soap, the kind shelters used. Her hair was braided unevenly, one braid looser than the other, done by hands that trembled or rushed. She leaned in close, almost touching his ear. Her voice was barely a breath. "My mom is locked in the basement." Grim did not interrupt. "She won't wake up," Lily continued, the words practiced, memorized. "He said, if I tell anyone, he'll hurt my baby brother." Her hand tightened around the doll. Grim's jaw flexed once, hard. Lily hesitated, then added the last part, the part that mattered most to her. "My mom said, the motorcycle people protect people." Silence pressed down on the room, heavy and absolute. Grim stayed where he was, kneeling, his face unreadable. But inside him, something old and sharp had surfaced. He had heard fear before. He had heard lies. This was neither. He looked at Lily carefully, not at her clothes, not at the doll, but at her eyes. Eyes that had learned not to scream. Eyes that had learned that being quiet was safer. Grim understood that kind of learning. "Hey," he said softly, the first word spoken since she entered. His voice was low, steady, unthreatening. "What's your name, kid?" She swallowed. "Lily," she said. He nodded once, committing it to memory. Behind them, the jukebox hummed faintly, stuck between songs. The lyrics that had been playing before, about street laws and broken promises, hung unfinished in the air. Grim did not yet ask who had done this. He did not need to. Not yet. Grim remained kneeling in front of Lily, his weight balanced on the balls of his feet, close enough that she would not feel alone, but not so close that she would feel trapped. The bar was silent in a way that felt deliberate now, like every man inside had chosen stillness instead of chaos. The rain outside tapped softly against the metal walls, a distant, patient sound. "What's your name, kid?" Grim asked again, gently, as if giving her time to decide whether he deserved the answer. "Lily," she said, her voice small but steady. She did not look away when she spoke. Her eyes were dark, observant, far older than 7. Children who had been protected did not look like this. Children who had been believed did not measure every adult word so carefully. Grim nodded once. "That's a good name." She relaxed just a fraction, enough for him to notice. He glanced down briefly and saw how tightly she was gripping the doll, her knuckles pale. Her other hand trembled, then stilled as she tucked it into the sleeve of her pajamas. He noticed the movement and understood it immediately, hiding the bruises without thinking about it. A habit formed early. "Lily," Grim said, keeping his voice low, "you said someone locked your mom in a basement." She nodded. "And you said he wears a uniform." Another nod, slower this time. Her throat moved as she swallowed. For the first time since entering the bar, she hesitated. Grim waited. "He's a police officer," she whispered. "His name is Thomas Reed." The name landed like a dropped glass. The room changed. Not explosively, not loudly, but undeniably. A ripple passed through the black howlers, shoulders tightening, expressions hardening. This was no longer a vague threat, no longer a faceless monster. This was authority. Paperwork. doors that stayed closed when you knocked, calls that never came back. Near the far wall, a man named Marcus Hale shifted his stance. Marcus was in his late 30s, thick-armed with a shaved head and eyes that never fully softened. A faded tattoo of a raven climbed his forearm, the ink uneven from an older, rougher time in his life. Marcus had lost his younger brother 5 years earlier during a roadside stop that had ended with excuses and an internal investigation that went nowhere. Since then, Marcus spoke little about police, but when he did, his voice always went flat, like a door shutting. He looked at Lily now, and something flickered across his face: pain, recognition, restraint. At the bar, the bartender Caleb reached casually beneath the counter and pressed a small button with his thumb. The door lock clicked softly. He did not announce it. He did not look toward Lily. Caleb was tall and thin, early 50s, with graying hair pulled into a short tail and hands scarred from years of broken bottles and worse nights. He had seen enough trouble in his life to know when to keep it outside. Locking the door was not about keeping Lily in. It was about keeping everything else out. Grim stayed where he was, but his mind had already shifted gears. Thomas Reed, police officer. A man protected by a badge and by the quiet agreement of others not to ask too many questions. Grim had known men like that before. Some wore uniforms, some wore smiles. "Did he hurt you?" Grim asked. Lily shook her head quickly. Not like Mom. Her answer was careful, precise. Grim did not press further. He didn't need details yet, he needed trust. "What about your brother?" he asked. "He's little," Lily said. "He cries a lot, that makes him mad." Grim closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, his expression had not changed, but something behind it had hardened, set into place. Across the room, Evan had moved closer without realizing it. He was watching Lily like he might look at a reflection he didn't want to see. Evan had grown up bouncing between foster homes, learning early that attention could be dangerous. He remembered bruises hidden under sleeves. He remembered learning to stay quiet. Seeing Lily now felt like watching time fold in on itself. Grim shifted his weight slightly and sat back on his heels. "Lily," he said, "is your mom awake right now?" She shook her head. She was talking earlier. Then she fell down. Her voice cracked at the end of the sentence. This time she did not stop it. Grim reached out slowly, palm open, and waited. When Lily didn't pull away, he rested his hand lightly on her shoulder. His touch was steady, deliberate, as if to say, "You are here, and you are not wrong for being afraid." Around them, the black howlers stayed quiet, but Grim felt their attention sharpen. These were men who lived by codes not written down. No children, no women, no one weaker than you. The world might call them criminals, but even criminals drew lines. Grim's thoughts drifted backward, uninvited. He saw himself at 9 years old, standing in a trailer kitchen that smelled like old beer and burned toast. His mother's voice behind a closed door, the sound of something breaking. He remembered going to a neighbor once, knocking softly, rehearsing what to say. The door had opened just long enough for the neighbor to see his face, and then closed again. No one had come. No one had knelt down to meet his eyes. Grim had learned something that day. If no one protects you, you either disappear, or you become someone who can. He looked at Lily again. She was watching his face closely, reading him the way children learn to read danger. She had already crossed a city alone at night. She had chosen a room full of strangers over staying silent. That told him everything. Behind him, Marcus exhaled slowly, controlled. Another man, Luis, a quiet rider with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes, crossed his arms and leaned against the wall. Luis had a daughter Lily's age, asleep at home in a room filled with stuffed animals and nightlights. He imagined her walking into a place like this alone. and his stomach tightened. Grim stood up carefully, rising to his full height. The room shifted again, not in fear, but in readiness. He took off his leather vest and draped it around Lily's shoulders. It swallowed her frame completely, the weight of it grounding her. "You did the right thing," he said. She looked down at the vest, then back up at him. "You're really bikers?" she said, not accusingly, just stating a fact. Grim allowed the smallest hint of a smile. "Yeah, we are." She nodded, as if confirming something her mother had told her long ago. The jukebox hummed again, still stuck between songs, like it didn't know what came next. Outside, the rain kept falling, steady and patient, unaware that a line had just been crossed inside a bar that didn't appear on any map. And somewhere across the city, a man named Thomas Reed slept, believing himself untouchable. Grim did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. When he straightened and turned slightly, the Black Howlers understood that the moment for listening had ended and the moment for action had begun. Outside, rain continued to wash the streets of Portland's industrial edge, blurring the city into streaks of sodium light and shadow. Inside the iron den, the air shifted from tension to purpose. "This isn't revenge," Grim said, calm and measured. "It's responsibility." No one argued. They moved the way wolves did when winter pressed too hard. Without panic, without ceremony. Roles fell into place because they always had. Some men drifted toward the back rooms. Others stepped outside to make calls. The door stayed locked, not as a prison, but as a promise. Lily sat on a bar stool wrapped in Grim's leather vest, her feet dangling inches above the floor. Caleb, the bartender, slid a plate of food toward her. Grilled cheese cut into careful triangles, the crusts trimmed away. Caleb had once been a father before a drunk driver took that part of his life from him. Since then, he'd learned to speak gently to children, as if loudness itself might frighten them. "Eat slow," he told her. "You're safe here." Lily nodded and did as she was told. When she finished, Caleb brought a glass of milk and smiled without expecting anything back. Near the pool tables, Rhea Morgan rolled a battered red toolbox across the floor. Rhea was the Black Howler's mechanic. 35, compact, with grease-stained hands and short black hair shaved on one side. Her eyes were sharp and restless, the kind that noticed things before they became problems. She spoke little, worked constantly, and trusted machines more than people. Years earlier, a faulty security system had cost her a brother during a warehouse fire. Since then, she never took technology at face value. She pulled up a chair, opened her laptop, and began scrolling through traffic feeds, building records, and city infrastructure maps. It didn't take long. "Found something," Rhea said. Grim walked over, Evan close behind him. On the screen was a live feed from a quiet residential street. A modest house sat behind a chain-link fence, lights off except for one window in the basement. Rhea zoomed in, fingers flying. "Those cameras were altered," she said. "Timestamp loops. Angle shifted to miss the back entrance." That wasn't DIY. Someone knew what they were doing. Grim studied the image. He didn't ask how she got access. He trusted Rhea because she didn't exaggerate. At the far end of the room, old Ben Carter cleared his throat. Despite sharing Lily's last name, he was no relation. Ben was 72, stooped, with hands permanently curled from arthritis and decades of riding. His beard was white, his voice quiet. But when he spoke, people listened. Ben had outlived 2 wars, a heart attack, and most of his enemies. "We do this clean," Ben said. "No kids hurt, ever. That's the line." Grim nodded. "Always." Ben's eyes drifted toward Lily, now fighting sleep as her body finally gave in. She already crossed a line no child should have to cross. Grim looked at Lily again. Her eyelids fluttered. She leaned sideways, curling into the corner of the sofa someone had dragged over earlier. Evan placed a folded blanket over her carefully as if she were glass. "She hasn't slept," Evan said quietly. Grim crouched and pulled the blanket up around Lily's shoulders. Her breathing slowed almost immediately. For the first time that night, her fingers loosened around the doll. In the back room, the teams formed. Marcus took 3 men to gather information: public records, complaint logs, archived footage that never quite disappeared if you knew where to look. Marcus approached the task with methodical focus. Pain had taught him patience. Luis paired with Rhea to monitor the house remotely. Luis had steady hands and a memory for patterns. Rhea trusted him because he asked questions without ego. Grim stayed in the center of it all, absorbing updates, making decisions, saying little. Leadership, he believed, wasn't about commands. It was about clarity. A young dog padded into the room. Cole, a black and tan mutt with one ear permanently bent. He was 2 years old and belonged to no one and everyone. Cole sniffed the air, then hopped onto the couch beside Lily, curling his body protectively around her legs. No one told him to do it. Outside, engines rumbled to life and then went silent again. Preparation without noise. Purpose without spectacle. Marcus returned first, face set. Thomas Reed, 10 years on the force, no sustained complaints. 3 internal reviews that went nowhere. Pattern of domestic calls to the same address, marked resolved without follow-up. Grim closed his eyes briefly. Neighbors? 2 reports of yelling, no statements. 1 family moved out 6 months ago. Rhea's fingers paused mid-key. Basement windows new, reinforced. Someone didn't want anyone looking in. Grim exhaled slowly. Every piece fit too well. He turned back to Lily, asleep now, her face relaxed in a way that made her look her age again. He thought of how she'd walked through rain and fear to get here. Thought of how many doors had closed before this one opened. "This doesn't end tonight," Grim said quietly, "but it starts tonight." No one disagreed. They did not speak of violence. They spoke of timing, of observation, of not being seen until they needed to be. Wolves did not rush prey. They waited. As the rain softened outside, the iron den settled into an uneasy calm. Lily slept through it all, the hum of distant traffic and the low voices blending into something like a lullaby. Grim stood near the door, watching the street through the narrow gap in the curtain. He didn't look like a hero. He didn't feel like one. He felt like a man who had finally been asked the right question at the right time, and he intended to answer it. The rain had thinned to a cold mist by the time Grim and the others reached the quiet residential street. The neighborhood looked ordinary in the way danger often hid best. Single-story houses, trimmed lawns, a broken porch light flickering across the road. Nothing here warned of what waited beneath one particular home. Grim killed the engine a block away. He moved on foot with Marcus and Luis, the 3 of them shadows slipping between parked cars and hedges damp with night. The back of the house was darker than the front. No cameras faced the narrow service alley, just as Rhea had predicted. Grim tested the door gently. Locked, but old. Marcus worked the frame with practiced patience until the latch gave with a soft click that sounded far too loud in the stillness. They stepped inside one by one, closing the door behind them. The house smelled wrong. Not decay exactly, more like something stale that had been sealed away too long. The air was thick, unmoving. Grim felt the tension in his shoulders tighten, his senses narrowing. This was not unfamiliar territory to him. He had walked into places like this before, places where silence meant someone had already learned not to call out. They followed the sound first, a faint, uneven breathing drifting up through the floorboards. The basement door was at the end of the hallway, half hidden behind a stack of unopened boxes. Marcus moved them aside carefully. The door handle was reinforced, newer than the rest of the house. Grim exchanged a glance with Luis. This wasn't a panic room. This was a cage. Grim opened the door. The stairs descended into darkness so complete it felt solid. The smell intensified. Concrete, dampness, something metallic. Grim took the lead, his steps slow, deliberate, counting each one. The beam of his flashlight cut through the black and revealed the space below. The basement had no windows. The walls were bare concrete, stained with moisture. A single exposed bulb hung from the ceiling, unlit. In one corner lay a thin mattress, twisted and uneven. Near it, a small shape curled inward on itself. "Noah," Luis whispered. The boy looked up at the sound of his name. Noah Carter was 4 years old, too thin, his skin pale beneath the dirt smudged across his cheeks. His hair was tightly coiled, uncut, sticking up in uneven tufts. His eyes were enormous in his small face, dark and alert, filled with the sharp fear of a child who had learned to listen for footsteps. He did not cry. He did not scream. He simply stared. Grim knelt slowly, lowering himself into Noah's line of sight. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "You're okay now." Noah didn't move. Then, after a moment, he reached out and grabbed Grim's hand with surprising strength. His fingers were cold. He held on like letting go wasn't an option. Grim felt something tighten in his chest. He didn't pull away. Marcus scanned the rest of the room. His flashlight beam shifted to the far wall, then stilled. "Grim," he said quietly. Grim followed the light. Sarah Carter lay on the concrete floor near the wall, partially shielded by a broken folding chair. She was in her early 30s, tall and slender, her frame once strong but now drawn tight with pain. Her skin was deep brown, marred by bruises blooming across her arms and collarbone. Her dark hair hung loose and tangled around her face, damp with sweat. One side of her cheek was swollen, her lip split. She was breathing, but shallowly, each breath an effort. Sarah had once been the kind of woman people leaned on. Before Thomas Reed entered her life, she worked double shifts, smiled easily, and spoke to strangers like they were already friends. Years of isolation and fear had hollowed that warmth, turning it inward, but it hadn't killed it. It clung to her still, fragile but alive. Grim moved to her side immediately. He knelt, checking her breathing, her pulse. She stirred faintly at his touch, a low sound escaping her throat. Her eyes fluttered, but did not open. "She's alive," Grim said. "Barely." Marcus exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "We got here in time." Grim shrugged off his leather jacket without hesitation and wrapped it around Sarah's shoulders, careful, gentle. The jacket was heavy, worn in all the right places. It carried warmth, the smell of road and rain and oil. Sarah's body instinctively leaned into it, even in semi-consciousness. Noah tightened his grip on Grim's hand, pressing closer to his leg. Grim scooped him up smoothly, holding him against his side. Noah did not resist. He rested his head against Grim's chest, his small body trembling with exhaustion more than fear now. Luis knelt beside Marcus, checking the room one last time. "Nothing else," he whispered. "No traps. No alarms." "Good," Grim said. He adjusted his hold on Noah and slid one arm under Sarah's back, lifting her carefully. She was lighter than she should have been. That angered him more than anything else had tonight. As they moved toward the stairs, Sarah's eyes opened briefly. They were dark brown, glassy with pain but sharp with instinct. She tried to speak, panic flashing across her face as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings, the unfamiliar men. "You're safe," Grim said immediately, meeting her gaze. "Your kids are safe." Her eyes searched his face, desperate. "Lily?" she whispered. "She found us," Grim replied. "She did good." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, spilling silently down her temples. She closed them again, her body finally giving in. They ascended the stairs, slowly, carefully. Marcus opened the back door, scanning the alley. The night remained quiet, indifferent. Rain misted the air, cool against Grim's skin. Outside, one of the men waiting, Dale, a broad-shouldered rider with a gray beard and a voice that rarely rose above a murmur, saw them emerge and whispered, "We made it." Grim nodded once. "We did." They moved quickly but without haste, transferring Sarah into the back of a waiting vehicle padded with blankets. Noah refused to let go of Grim until Marcus distracted him with a small toy pulled from his pocket. A battered plastic car, chipped and faded. Noah took it cautiously, curiosity winning over fear. As the doors closed and the vehicle pulled away, Grim stood in the alley for a moment longer, rain collecting in his hair, his clothes heavy and damp. He looked back at the house, quiet now, empty of its secrets. Somewhere above them, the city continued as if nothing had changed. But Grim knew better. Tonight a basement had lost its hold, and a family had been pulled back into the light. Morning crept into the city quietly, pale and reluctant, as if unsure it was welcome. The rain had finally stopped, leaving Portland washed clean and sharp-edged, the kind of clarity that made lies stand out. While Grim's vehicle disappeared down a side street with Sarah and her children safe inside, another kind of movement had already begun. Quieter, faster, and far harder to stop once set in motion. Rhea didn't celebrate. She sat alone in the back room of the iron den, laptop balanced on her knees, fingers moving with calm precision. The hard drive lay on the table beside her, black casing scuffed, its label peeled away long ago. It had been hidden inside a false panel beneath a breaker box in Thomas Reed's garage. Clever, but not clever enough. Rhea had recognized the trick immediately. She had once learned the same method while rewiring security systems for warehouses that didn't want inspectors to know what happened after hours. "This thing's heavy," she murmured, not because of its weight, but because of what it held. She copied everything twice, checksum verified, then once more to a clean device. Audio files first. Voices raised, threats delivered with the casual confidence of someone certain there would be no consequences. Then video. Basement angles. Hallway shadows. A uniform hanging on a hook while violence happened just out of frame. Timestamps that told stories no report ever had. Marcus stood behind her, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the progress bar. He didn't ask questions. He had waited years for something like this to exist. Not justice. Proof. Across town, in a brick building that housed a small but stubborn newsroom, Elena Park stared at her phone until it vibrated again. Elena was an investigative reporter in her early 40s, petite, sharp-featured, with tired eyes that had learned how to read fear in other people's voices. She dressed simply, dark blazer, scuffed boots, because attention was a liability. 2 years earlier, a note had been taped to her windshield after she published a piece on police overtime fraud. It had promised she wouldn't get a second warning. She published anyway. When the encrypted message arrived, Elena didn't open it immediately. She checked the locks. Fed her elderly tabby, Miso, who wound around her ankles like a question mark. Miso was 15, blind in one eye, and possessed of an uncanny ability to sense bad news. He settled on the desk as Elena finally clicked. She didn't flinch as the first audio played. She didn't cry when the video followed. She leaned back, closed her eyes once, and then began making calls. By noon, the newsroom hummed with a low, controlled urgency. Editors whispered. Screens glowed. Lawyers were looped in. Elena contacted Special Agent Daniel Ruiz at the Federal Inspector's Office, a tall, careful man with graying hair and a reputation for listening longer than he spoke. Ruiz had grown up in a household where uniforms were respected until they weren't. He had learned early that loyalty to the law meant being willing to confront the people who wore it. Ruiz watched the files alone in his office, door closed. He took notes. He paused and rewound. He noted patterns. When he finished, he sat still for a full minute before making his first call. "Freeze internal operations," he said calmly. Effective immediately. At the Portland Police Bureau, confusion rippled outward. Internal access was restricted. Systems locked. Supervisors were called into meetings without explanation. The phrase "pending review" appeared everywhere, suddenly and repeatedly like a stain spreading through paperwork. By mid-afternoon, the story broke. Elena's article went live without fanfare, just facts laid bare and sourced beyond dismissal. She did not editorialize. She did not shout. She let the evidence speak because it did not need help. Phones rang non-stop. Social media ignited. The name Thomas Reed trended alongside words that hadn't been allowed near it before. At the Iron Den, Grimm watched it all unfold on a muted television mounted above the bar. He stood with his arms folded, expression unreadable. When reporters began circling the block, cameras flashing, Caleb dimmed the lights and locked the door again. "They want you," Caleb said quietly. Grimm shook his head. "They want a story." Outside, Elena stood with a microphone, rain jacket zipped to her chin, eyes scanning the gathered faces. When Grimm finally stepped out, the crowd surged. "Jack Dalton, were you involved in obtaining this evidence? Did the Black Howlers rescue the victims? Is this vigilantism?" Grimm raised one hand and the noise fell back, just enough. "I'm not answering questions," he said evenly. A reporter pushed forward. "Then who should we ask?" Grimm looked past them, toward the street where Lily would later walk without looking over her shoulder. "Ask the girl," he said. "She told the truth first." He turned and went back inside. Inside the den, Rhea closed her laptop. Marcus exhaled. Somewhere else in the city, Agent Ruiz drafted warrants and timelines, careful not to outrun the evidence. Truth, once spoken, did not need engines. It moved on its own. The arrest happened just before dawn, when the city was quiet enough to hear every step echo. Thomas Reed was taken from his house in plain clothes, hands cuffed behind his back, his expression fixed somewhere between disbelief and practiced calm. He was 41, broad-shouldered, clean-cut, with the look of a man who had always expected doors to open for him. His uniform was left hanging in a closet, untouched. Outside, neighbors watched from behind curtains, their faces pale with the understanding that something permanent had shifted. By the end of the week, the courtroom was full. Sarah Carter entered through a side door flanked by 2 federal marshals, her posture careful, measured. She had always been tall and slender, the kind of woman whose presence once filled rooms with warmth. Years of fear had tightened her movements, pulled her shoulders inward, but there was a steadiness to her now that hadn't been there before. Her hair was neatly braided, her bruises fading but not gone. She wore a simple gray dress and flat shoes. Nothing that would draw attention, nothing that could be used against her. Witness protection had come quickly, efficiently. A temporary apartment, new routines, a phone that rang only when it was supposed to. Sarah hated the quiet at first. Silence had never meant safety to her. But Lily slept through the night now, and Noah laughed more often than he cried, and that was enough to make the quiet tolerable. Lily walked beside her mother into the courtroom, holding the same white doll, now freshly washed. She wore a navy blue sweater and dark pants, her hair neatly braided the way Sarah had once braided it before everything went wrong. Lily was 7, but she carried herself like someone who understood the weight of rooms like this. Her eyes moved carefully, cataloging faces, exits, sounds. Cole wasn't allowed inside the courthouse, but she could still feel his warmth beside her in memory. Thomas Reed sat at the defense table, jaw clenched, eyes straight ahead. The badge he once wore was gone. In its place was a suit that didn't quite fit right, shoulders stiff with tension. He avoided looking at Sarah. The judge entered. The room rose and settled again. When Sarah testified, her voice was calm. She spoke of patterns, not moments, of how kindness had slowly turned into control, how isolation had been framed as protection. She did not dramatize. She didn't need to. The evidence had already done that work for her. She spoke for herself and for the years she had been taught to stay quiet. Then Lily's name was called. A murmur rippled through the room and died quickly. Lily walked to the witness stand with small, steady steps. She climbed onto the chair, feet dangling, hands folded carefully in front of her. The bailiff adjusted the microphone. Lily looked at it for a moment, then back at the judge. She took a breath. Her voice trembled at first, but it did not break. She spoke clearly, simply, about the basement, about her brother, about her mother not waking up, about walking into a bar full of strangers because her mom had once said bikers protected people. Halfway through, Lily reached down and placed the white doll on the table beside her. She didn't look at it again. The gesture was small, unremarkable to anyone who didn't understand. But Sarah felt it like a release, a goodbye to something Lily no longer needed to carry. The courtroom was silent when Lily finished. Even the reporters didn't move. From the back row, a young police officer stood. Officer Caleb Morris, 26, clean-shaven, eyes bright with nervous resolve. He wore his uniform stiffly, as if it weighed more than it should. Caleb had joined the force believing in protection, in fairness. He had seen things that made him doubt, but never enough to speak until now. "I want to apologize," he said, voice shaking but loud enough to carry. "To Sarah Carter, to her children, for what was ignored, for what should have been stopped." He sat down before anyone could respond. The judge adjourned for recess. Outside the courtroom, news spread quickly. The police chief resigned by noon. An interim director was appointed before sunset. Internal investigations expanded outward like cracks in ice, touching names that had long gone unquestioned. Grimm watched none of it from the iron den. He didn't need to. When reporters called again, he didn't answer. When someone asked for a statement, he repeated the same words. "Ask the girl." And for once, the world listened. Summer arrived quietly without asking permission. The air outside Portland softened, the sharp edges of winter rounding into warmth, and the old industrial strip near the iron den no longer felt like a place the city had forgotten. The sign above the bar still flickered, one letter stubbornly refusing to light, but the building itself seemed lighter somehow. Less like a bunker, more like a landmark that had survived long enough to mean something. It had been several months since the night the basement lost its hold. Sarah Carter stood on the sidewalk across from the bar, leaning lightly against the railing. Her posture relaxed in a way it hadn't been in years. She had regained weight, strength, color. Tall and slender, she carried herself with a calm confidence that came not from forgetting the past, but from surviving it. The fear that once sharpened her movements had softened into caution, and even that was fading. Therapy had helped. So had sunlight. So had the knowledge that no one was waiting in the shadows to punish her for speaking. She wore a simple cotton dress and flat sandals, her hair pulled back loosely. A faint scar remained near her collarbone, but she no longer tried to hide it. It was part of the story she had stopped being ashamed of. In the empty lot beside the bar, Lily chased fireflies. She laughed freely now, her laughter high and unrestrained, chasing the small blinking lights with open hands. She was 8 now, still small, still observant, but lighter. Her eyes no longer scanned exits out of habit. Her shoulders no longer tensed at sudden noises. She wore sneakers and a yellow hoodie, her hair braided neatly, bouncing as she ran. Each firefly she missed made her laugh harder, as if joy itself had become something she trusted again. Nearby, Noah wobbled down the cracked pavement on a small blue bicycle, training wheels rattling. He was 5, sturdier than before, his cheeks fuller, his eyes bright. Marcus jogged alongside him, steadying the seat with one hand. Noah pedaled furiously, tongue stuck out in concentration. "I'm doing it!" Noah shouted. "You are," Marcus said, smiling despite himself. Marcus Hale looked different these days. He still wore black, more often than not, his build still thick with strength. But the constant tension had eased. Losing his brother had carved something out of him that might never fully return, but watching Noah ride a bike without fear filled part of that hollow space. He didn't say that out loud. He didn't need to. Cole lay nearby in the shade, older now, his bent ear twitching as he watched Lily dart past. His coat gleamed in the afternoon light, healthy and clean. Every so often he lifted his head to make sure the children were still within sight, then settled again with a contented huff. He had taken his role seriously since the night Lily fell asleep beside him on the couch, as if he had decided then that watching over them was simply his job. Grim stood near the entrance of the iron den, hands resting loosely at his sides. He hadn't changed much on the surface. Same worn boots, same steady eyes, same leather jacket, though the patches had been removed. The black howlers were still there, but quieter, fewer. Some had left. Some had stayed. Some had taken the long road toward legitimacy. Rhea emerged from the garage next door, wiping her hands on a rag. She wore coveralls now, her name stitched cleanly on the chest. The garage was legal, licensed, busy. Engines still roared, but now they were fixed, not raced. Rhea had built something that stayed. Luis helped a customer load a repaired bike onto a trailer, nodding politely as the man thanked him. Old Ben sat on a folding chair near the door, cane resting across his knees, watching the scene like a man who had lived long enough to appreciate quiet victories. The black howlers hadn't disappeared. They had changed shape. Half the club had disbanded officially, records filed, names signed. The rest worked within the law now, not because it had always protected them, but because they had chosen to protect others without hiding. Near the wall, beside the bar's entrance, Lily had taped a drawing. It was done in bright crayons, lines bold and imperfect. It showed a group of people on motorcycles standing between two worlds, one side dark, one side bright. The figures were tall, broad, faceless. In front of them stood a small family holding hands. Above them all, a sun and a moon shared the same sky. Grim had noticed it the first day she put it up. He hadn't commented. He didn't need to. Sarah watched Lily for a moment longer before turning to Grim. She hesitated, choosing her words with care, then spoke. "The world needs different kinds of guardians," she said, "not always the ones with badges." Grim didn't answer immediately. He followed Lily's movement as she finally caught a firefly and released it again, clapping her hands in delight. He watched Noah wobble, then steady. He listened to the hum of the city breathing normally again. "We're not heroes," Grim said at last. His voice was calm, matter-of-fact. "We just make sure the real monsters don't sleep well." Sarah smiled. Not wide, not forced, but genuine. "My daughter crossed the dark to find you." Grim shook his head slightly. She found herself first. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the pavement. Engines purred softly as customers arrived and left. Life continued, not because it had been restored to what it was, but because something better had replaced it. Across town, the case against Thomas Reed moved steadily forward, no longer the center of every conversation, but not forgotten either. Reform took time. Trust took longer. But for the first time in a long while, progress wasn't a word people said with bitterness. Sarah took Noah's bike when he tired, carrying it back to the car. Lily skipped ahead, Cole trotting beside her. Before leaving, Lily ran back and hugged Grim around the waist without warning. He stiffened for half a second, then rested a hand gently on her shoulder. "See you tomorrow," she said. "I'll be here," Grim replied. As the Carter family drove away, the fireflies gathered again near the lot, blinking softly against the fading light. Grim stood watching until the car disappeared, then turned back toward the bar, not as a fortress, not as a refuge for the lost, but as a place that had done what it needed to do. The night came on gently, and for the first time in a long time, no one was afraid of it. At the end of this story, the lesson is not about motorcycles, courtrooms, or villains in uniform. It is about listening. Real change begins when someone chooses to listen to a voice that is small, scared, or easy to ignore. In everyday life, courage is often quiet. It looks like believing a child, like speaking up when silence feels safer, like choosing kindness even when power says you do not have to. This story reminds us that protection does not always come from titles or badges. Sometimes it comes from ordinary people who decide that harm stops with them. In our daily lives, we are given the same choice. We can look away, or we can become someone others feel safe turning to. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs hope. If you believe that dignity, empathy, and responsibility matter, let us know in the comments where you are watching from and what this story meant to you. If you want more stories that teach, heal, and remind us to be better to one another, please subscribe to the channel. May God bless everyone watching today. May He protect the innocent, soften hardened hearts, and give us the courage to do what is right when it matters most. If this message resonates with you, comment Amen and stand with those who choose light over fear.